You know, most wars have a clear ending, right? A treaty gets signed, soldiers head home, the world, it just moves on. But what happens when one soldier doesn't get that message? When for him, the war never ever actually ends? We're about to dive into one of the most extreme and, honestly, misunderstood cases of this ever recorded. Okay, so take a look at this photo. It's a Japanese soldier, and he's surrendering his rifle. But look real close at the date it was taken. December 1974. Yeah, you heard that right. That's almost 30 years after World War II was officially over. And no, this wasn't some kind of reenactment. This was the real deal. It was the final, lonely act of a war that for this one man had never stopped. The biggest question is, how on earth is that even possible? For nearly 30 years. Just let that sink in. That's how long Private First Class Teruo Nakamura followed his very last order. For 3 whole decades after the rest of the world declared peace, his own private war just kept on raging. I mean, to put that into perspective, a child born the year the war ended would be a full-grown adult with a life of their own by the time he finally laid down his arms. It's just incredible. To really get how this happened, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. The year is 1944. We're on this remote Indonesian island called Mordocai, and a 25-year-old soldier in the Imperial Japanese Army, a man named Teruo Nakamura, is about to be given an order that will literally seal his fate for the next 30 years. Now, the context here is absolutely crucial. By late 1944, the tide of the war had turned, and not in Japan's favor. So the orders coming down from high command, they weren't really about victory anymore. They were about pure defiance. They were absolute. Hold the line. Never surrender. Fight to the very last man. For a soldier like Nakamura, this wasn't just a command. It was a sacred duty, a duty he would uphold more literally than anyone could have ever imagined. It's important to understand, though, that Nakamura wasn't entirely alone in this situation. He was what we now call a holdout. You might have even heard of another famous holdout, Hiro Onoda, who surrendered in the Philippines in March of 1974. Well, get this, just 9 months later, Nakamura was discovered. That makes him the very last confirmed Japanese soldier of World War II to lay down his arms. The last one. It's almost impossible for us to really comprehend what that passage of time means. I mean, this wasn't just a few years of confusion. This was a war that stretched for 3 decades, fought entirely inside the mind of one completely isolated man. Think about that disconnect for a second. It's profound. While the entire world is celebrating VJ Day in 1945, Nakamura is digging in, preparing for the long haul. While humanity is taking its first steps on the moon in 1969, a moment that brought the whole world together, he was probably out foraging for food, still on high alert for the enemy. The world was changing at this dizzying pace, but for him, on his little island, time had just stopped in 1944. So the big question is, how did he survive for so long? Well, he basically became a ghost. He built this small hut deep in the jungle, living completely off the land. And when planes would fly over and drop leaflets announcing the war was over, he just dismissed them. To him, it was all just clever enemy propaganda. Every stranger was a potential threat, and his mission, his duty, was completely unchanged. But, you know, this lonely, isolated existence couldn't last forever. In late 1974, after nearly 30 years hidden away in the jungle, the outside world was finally about to find Private Nakamura. And then it happened. It was December 1974. A pilot actually spotted his secluded hut from the air. An Indonesian military unit was sent out, but this wasn't an assault mission. It was a delicate, almost surreal operation. Their job was to bring a man back from a bygone era. You can imagine, they had to be incredibly careful. As the soldiers got closer to his hut, they started singing the Japanese national anthem. And then he emerged, a 55-year-old man wearing a tattered uniform, still clutching his service rifle. And then they had to gently, carefully explain the impossible. The Empire of Japan had surrendered. The war had been over for 29 years. Can you even imagine the psychological shock of that moment? Decades of vigilance, of lonely sacrifice, all based on a reality that had just vanished into thin air. His reaction wasn't relief. It was this profound sense of shame. He reportedly wept, not because his unbelievable ordeal was finally over, but because in his mind he was surrendering. He had failed his mission. So, what happens next? What happens when a man who has been mentally and emotionally frozen in the year 1944 is suddenly thrust into the modern world? What is the psychological reality of coming back from that? For almost 3 decades, Nakamura lived in the world you see there on the left, a state of constant threat, always believing that his comrades would eventually come back for him. But the actual world, the one on the right, well, it was completely unrecognizable. Japan was no longer a warring empire, it was a peaceful technological and economic powerhouse. It was like a different planet. And if you need any proof of just how deep his conviction ran, it's right there in his own words. He kept a diary. In an entry from right before he was found in 1974, he describes seeing a modern plane flying overhead, but he could only interpret it through the only lens he had. His conclusion was simple. The enemy is still here. The war is not over. I will continue to wait. It's just heartbreaking. And this is where his story takes another complex and frankly tragic turn. You see, Nakamura wasn't ethnically Japanese. He was an indigenous Amis from Taiwan, which was a Japanese colony when he was drafted. So he was returned to Taiwan, not Japan, a home he hadn't seen in 30 years. He really struggled to adapt and faced a pretty complicated reception. And then, tragically, he died of lung cancer just 5 years later, in 1979. His story really ended as quietly and as complicated as it was lived. Teruo Nakamura's story is this unbelievable testament to human resilience and to the sheer power of an order. But it really forces us to ask a difficult question, doesn't it? What is the line between duty and illusion? And for a colonial soldier fighting for an empire that didn't even exist anymore, what does duty even mean? It's a line that, for one man, stayed buried deep in the jungle for 30 long, lonely years.